Ambassador Vexithari had waited 300 years for this moment, and now he stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Council with his hearts beating fast and his scales shimmering with pride. The humans had finally arrived. He watched them walk through the massive golden doors. These strange, soft creatures from a tiny blue world at the edge of the galaxy, and he felt a mixture of curiosity and something close to pity. They were so small, so fragile. With their smooth skin and their 2 eyes and their bodies that could break so easily, how had they even survived long enough to reach the stars? The Galactic Council chamber was enormous. A floating platform in the middle of an artificial nebula where representatives from 1,000 species gathered to conduct the business of civilization. Today was a special occasion because the humans were being officially welcomed into the Galactic Concord, and as tradition demanded, the elder races would present gifts to the newcomers. Vexithari represented the Kethoran Dominion, the most feared military power in 12 spiral arms, and he had brought something truly magnificent. The human delegation was led by a woman called Captain Lydia Chen, and Vexithari studied her carefully as she approached the central platform. She moved with confidence despite being surrounded by beings that could crush her with a single limb, and there was something in her eyes that made Vexithari slightly uncomfortable. It was not fear, it was curiosity. "Welcome, humanity, to the family of civilized species," announced the Grand Arbiter, a massive crystalline being that pulsed with inner light. "Today, you join 10,000 worlds in peace and cooperation, and as is our custom, the elder races offer gifts to mark this historic occasion. One by one, the great powers presented their offerings. The Valanthi gave a database containing the complete scientific knowledge of their civilization. The Murathi offered seeds from their sacred forests that could grow on any world. The Crystalline Collective presented a communication device that could reach across the entire galaxy in seconds. Then it was Vexithari's turn. He stepped forward with all 6 of his limbs moving in the formal pattern of respect, and behind him, his attendants wheeled in a massive containment field. Inside the field was something that made several nearby delegates take a step backward. It was the Vrixal. The creature stood 4 feet tall at the shoulder, covered in scales that shifted between colors like oil on water. It had 6 legs that ended in claws so sharp they could cut through starship armor, and its head was crowned with 4 horns that curved backward like deadly crescents. 6 eyes glowed crimson in the dim light of the containment field, each one tracking movement independently, each one analyzing threats and calculating attack patterns. The Vrixal was the greatest achievement of Kethoran bioengineering, a weapon that had taken 2,000 years to perfect. Its venom could dissolve metal, its scales could deflect plasma fire, its claws could cut through force fields. It possessed intelligence that rivaled most sentient species, along with telepathic abilities that allowed it to bond with a single master and follow commands without question. 3 interstellar wars had ended simply because the Kethorans had unleashed these creatures on their enemies. "Nobody wanted to face a Vrixal humans of Earth," Vexithari announced in his most formal voice. "The Kethoran Dominion recognizes your potential as warriors and survivors, and we present to you the Vrixal, our most sophisticated biological weapon, bred for conquest and perfected for destruction." He gestured to his attendants, and they lowered the containment field. The Vrixal stepped forward slowly, its claws clicking against the metal floor with sounds like knives being sharpened. Gasps echoed through the chamber as delegates scrambled to put distance between themselves and the creature. But the humans did not move. Captain Chen stood perfectly still as the Vrixal approached her, its 6 eyes fixed on her face, its nostrils flaring as it took in her scent. Vexithari watched with satisfaction, waiting for the fear to appear in her eyes, waiting for her to understand the magnitude of the gift she had received. The Vrixal stopped directly in front of her, close enough that its breath stirred her hair. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Captain Chen did something that Vexathari would remember for the rest of his very long life. She reached out her hand. "What are you doing?" Vexathari hissed in alarm. "That creature could kill you in a heartbeat!" But Chen ignored him completely. Her hand touched the Vrixal's snout, right between its upper eyes, and she began to scratch gently. The deadliest biological weapon in the known galaxy made a sound that Vexathari had never heard before. It was a deep rumbling that started in the creature's chest and vibrated through its entire body. "Oh my God," Chen whispered, and her face transformed into an expression of pure delight. "Oh my God, look at you!" Vexathari waited for her to say something about the creature's deadliness, its power, its potential for destruction. "You are absolutely adorable," Chen said instead. The chamber fell completely silent. Vexathari's translator must have malfunctioned because there was no way she had said what he thought she had said. "I am sorry," he managed. "Could you repeat that?" Chen was now using both hands to scratch behind the Vrixal's horns, and the creature had lowered its massive head to give her better access. "I said it's adorable," she repeated happily. "Look at its little face and those big eyes, and oh, are those scales? They're so pretty." "Those scales can deflect plasma fire," Vexathari said weakly. "And they're such a lovely color," Chen agreed, completely missing the point. "Can it change colors? I think I saw them shift just now." The Vrixal's scales rippled and turned a soft shade of pink. Several Kethoran attendants fainted. "It's never done that before," Vexathari whispered in horror. Chen had somehow found a spot under the creature's chin that made its back legs start twitching, and she laughed with pure joy. "Who's a good boy?" she cooed at the apex predator. "Who's the goodest boy in the whole galaxy?" The Vrixal's tail, which was tipped with a stinger containing enough venom to destroy a small city, began to wag. Vexathari turned to his assistant with eyes wide with shock. "Are you recording this?" he demanded. "Every second, Ambassador." "Good, because nobody is going to believe it otherwise." Captain Chen looked up at Vexathari with the biggest smile he had ever seen on a human face. "Thank you so much for this gift," she said sincerely. "We're going to take such good care of him, and I promise we'll give him the best life possible." "It is a weapon," Vexathari said desperately. "It is meant for war and destruction." "He's meant for cuddles," Chen corrected him. "Aren't you, buddy?" "Yes, you are." The Vrixal, terror of 12 spiral arms, destroyer of armies, ender of civilizations, rolled onto its back and presented its belly for scratches. Vexathari watched a human ambassador rub the stomach of the most dangerous creature in the galaxy while making sounds that he later learned were called baby talk. He had a terrible feeling that the Kethoran Dominion had made a serious miscalculation about the nature of humanity, and as he watched the Vrixal purr like a contented kitten while Captain Chen promised it treats and a warm bed, Vexathari realized that his people understood nothing about humans at all. 3 months had passed since the ceremony at the Galactic Council, and Vexathari had requested assignment aboard the human colony ship Evergreen as a cultural liaison. That was the official reason anyway. The truth was that the Kethoran High Command was deeply concerned about what the humans were doing with their gift, and they had sent Vexathari to observe and report. What he discovered aboard the Evergreen shattered everything he thought he knew about the universe. The humans had named the Vrixal Sergeant Fluffkins. When Vexathari first heard this name spoken aloud, he had to excuse himself and spend 20 minutes alone in his quarters trying to process the information. The creature that had haunted the nightmares of countless species across the galaxy, the living weapon that had ended wars and toppled empires, was now responding to the name Fluffkins and wagging its tail whenever someone said it, but that was only the beginning of Vexathari's education in human madness. He was walking through the recreation deck on his 15th day aboard when he saw something that made him stop dead in his tracks. Sergeant Fluffkins was wearing clothes, not armor, not combat gear, but a pink knitted garment that covered its torso and had little holes cut out for each of its 6 legs. Across the back of this garment, someone had stitched the words "Good Boy" in bright yellow thread. Vex Thari approached the ship's veterinarian, a cheerful man named Dr. Marcus Webb, who seemed to spend most of his time following the Vrixal around with treats and toys. "What is that creature wearing?" Vexathari demanded. Dr. Webb looked up from his datapad and smiled. "Oh, that's his new sweater. Mrs. Patterson from the knitting club made it for him because she noticed he liked to sit near the heating vents." "The Vrixal does not get cold," Vexthari protested. "Its internal temperature regulation is perfect." "Maybe he just likes the color," Dr. Webb shrugged. "He definitely seems happier when he's wearing it." As if to prove this point, Sergeant Fluffkins chose that moment to roll onto his back and wave all 6 legs in the air while making that strange rumbling sound that Vexthari had come to recognize as contentment. A group of children immediately ran over and began rubbing his belly. Vexathari watched in horrified fascination as tiny human hands touched the creature's venomous spine fur without any protective equipment. "Those spines contain neurotoxins that can kill in seconds," he said weakly. "Yeah, Fluffkin seems to have figured out how to retract them when kids are around," Dr. Webb explained casually. "It's pretty impressive, actually, like how cats can choose to keep their claws in. The Vrixal is nothing like a cat." "Are you sure about that?" Dr. Webb pointed to where Sergeant Fluffkins was now purring loudly while a little girl braided ribbons into his mane. "Because he's been knocking things off tables with his tail and demanding food at exactly the same time every day, so he seems pretty cat-like to me." Vexathari had no response to this. Over the following weeks, he documented everything he observed with growing disbelief. He watched crew members scratch beneath the Vrixal's chin during meal times while it sat beside them like some kind of oversized pet. He saw children read stories to the creature at bedtime, and he could have sworn that Sergeant Fluffkins was actually listening and following along. He witnessed the ship's captain, Lydia Chen herself, spending her off-duty hours playing fetch with a biological weapon using a specially reinforced ball that could withstand the creature's jaws. "You do understand what that animal is capable of, yes?" Vexathari asked her one evening. Captain Chen was brushing Sergeant Fluffkin's scales with a large grooming tool, and the Vrixal had its eyes half closed in bliss. "Of course I do," she replied calmly. "He's capable of love, loyalty, and being the best boy in the entire universe, isn't that right, Fluffkins?" The creature's tail wagged so hard that it knocked over a chair. "That is not what I meant," Vexathari insisted. "This animal was designed to destroy, to kill, to inspire terror in all who face it." Chen stopped brushing and looked at him with an expression that Vexathari could not quite read. "Do you know what wolves are?" "Ambassador." "I have read about them in your historical files," he admitted. "Large, predatory pack hunters from your home world." "Exactly. And do you know what we did with wolves?" Vexathari thought about it. "You hunted them to near extinction on several continents." "Some of us did that, yes, but others did something different." Chen smiled and resumed brushing. "Others looked at these dangerous predators with their sharp teeth and their hunting instincts, and they thought, 'I want to be friends with that.' That seems extremely unwise." "Probably was at first," Chen agreed. "But we kept doing it anyway, generation after generation, until wolves became dogs, and now dogs are our best friends, our helpers. Our family members who sleep in our beds and wear little costumes on holidays." She gestured toward Sergeant Fluffkins. "Humans see something dangerous, and our first instinct isn't to destroy it or run away from it, but to make friends with it, to find the good in it, to love it until it loves us back." Vexathari stared at her. "That is the most terrifying thing I have ever heard." Chen laughed. "I suppose it might seem that way from the outside." Over the next few days, Vexathari began to notice something else. Sergeant Fluffkins was changing. Not physically, although the creature did seem somewhat larger and healthier than when it had first arrived. No, the change was in the Vrixal's behavior, in the way it looked at the humans around it. When Vexathari first saw the creature at the Galactic Council, its eyes had burned with predatory hunger, always searching for threats, always calculating the fastest way to kill everything in the room. Now those same eyes were soft when they looked at the children, alert when they sensed anyone approaching Captain Chen, and peaceful when the creature lay in the recreation deck surrounded by crew members who treated it like family. One night, Vexathari found himself sitting alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars and trying to make sense of everything he had witnessed. Sergeant Fluffkins appeared silently beside him, which was alarming given that the creature weighed several hundred pounds and had never shown any interest in Vexathari before. They sat together in silence for a while. Then, very slowly, the Vrixal lowered its massive head and rested it on Vexathari's lap. He froze, certain that he was about to die. But nothing happened. The creature just lay there, breathing slowly, its 6 eyes closed, apparently content to simply exist in this moment with him. Vexathari looked down at the apex predator resting peacefully against him, and he felt something shift inside his chest. "Maybe they are right about you," he whispered, and carefully, very carefully, he began to stroke the Vrixal's mane. Sergeant Fluffkins purred, and Vexathari realized with sudden clarity that the humans had not tamed this creature at all. They had simply shown it that there was another way to exist, a way that did not require death and destruction, a way built on trust and affection and belonging. The Keth Orin Dominion had created a weapon. The humans had created a friend. The distress call came at 3 in the morning, ship time, and it changed everything. Vexathari was jolted awake by the blaring of alarms and the red emergency lights that flooded his quarters. He scrambled into the corridor and found crew members rushing toward their stations with expressions of grim determination. "What is happening?" he demanded, grabbing a passing officer by the arm. "The Kalar 7 colony," she replied quickly. "Pirates have them surrounded, 40 warships, and we're the only vessel close enough to respond." Vexathari felt his blood run cold. 40 warships against 1 colony transport was no contest at all. The Evergreen had basic defensive capabilities, but it was never designed for combat. And the colony on Kalar 7 had even less. This was going to be a massacre. He made his way to the bridge where Captain Chen was already issuing orders with calm authority. The main view screen showed the tactical situation, and it was worse than Vexathari had imagined. The Bloodfang cartel had surrounded the planet with their entire fleet, dozens of heavily armed cruisers and destroyers forming a blockade that nothing could penetrate. They were demanding tribute, technology, resources, and if the colony could not pay, they would start executing civilians. "Our weapons cannot penetrate their shields," Lieutenant Torres reported from the tactical station, "and their combined firepower would destroy us in seconds if we engaged directly." "What about reinforcements?" Chen asked. "Nearest military vessel is 3 days away at maximum speed." "The colony doesn't have 3 days." Chen stood in the center of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, staring at the view screen with an expression that Vexathari had not seen before. It was not fear, and it was not desperation. It was something else entirely, something hard and cold and dangerous. "Get me everything we have on the Bloodfang cartel," she ordered. "Their ships, their tactics, their leadership, everything." The information appeared on secondary screens around the bridge. The cartel was led by a Thexian warlord named Gral Vok, a brutal creature who had risen to power through violence and intimidation. His fleet had terrorized this sector for decades, and he was responsible for countless atrocities. 2 years ago, his forces had intercepted a refugee transport carrying families fleeing from a war zone. 300 civilians had been aboard, including nearly 100 children. Gralvok had destroyed the transport anyway, just to make an example. There were no survivors. Vexathari watched Captain Chen read this information, and he saw something change in her eyes. "Torres," she said quietly, "where is Sergeant Fluffkins right now?" "The recreation deck, Captain, with the overnight crew." "Have him brought to my ready room." Vexathari followed her off the bridge, his curiosity overwhelming his fear. Chen's ready room was a small space adjacent to the bridge, filled with personal items and photographs of her crew. She sat down on the floor rather than in her chair, and when Sergeant Fluffkins arrived a few minutes later, she was waiting for him at eye level. The Vrixal padded into the room and immediately went to her, pressing his great head against her chest in the gesture of affection that he had learned from the children. Chen wrapped her arms around him and held on tightly. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "I need to talk to you about something important." The creature's 6 eyes focused on her face with total attention. "There are bad people out there," Chen continued, her voice steady despite the tears that Vexathari could see forming in her eyes. "Really bad people who want to hurt our family, who want to hurt the children and everyone else on this ship and on the planet below." Sergeant Fluffkins made a low sound in his throat, not the purr of contentment, but something deeper and more primal. "I know you didn't ask for this," Chen said softly. "I know you were created to be a weapon, and I know we've been trying to show you that you can be something else, something more. And you have been, Fluffkins. You've been so much more than anyone ever expected." She pulled back and looked directly into the creature's eyes. "But right now, I need to ask you something that I have no right to ask, and I need you to understand that you can say no, that you don't have to do this if you don't want to." The Vrixal was perfectly still, listening. "There are people down there who are going to die if we don't help them, including children. Kids just like the ones who read you stories and make you flower crowns and sneak you extra treats when they think nobody is watching." A single tear escaped down Chen's cheek. "I'm asking you to help us protect them. Not because you were made to fight, but because you're part of this family now, and families protect each other." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Sergeant Fluffkins rose to his full height, towering over Captain Chen, and his scales began to shift. The soft pink that the crew had grown accustomed to seeing darkened, deepened, transformed into a shade of red so dark it was almost black. It was the color of old blood. It was the color of vengeance. The creature's eyes, which had been soft and warm for months, now blazed with the ancient fire of the apex predator he had always been. But there was something different in that fire now, something that had not been there before. Purpose, love, protection. Sergeant Fluffkins threw back his head and released a sound that Vexathari had only read about in the oldest Kethoran historical records. It was the hunting call of the Vrixal, the war cry that had shattered armies and ended civilizations. But this was not the mindless roar of a weapon following its programming. This was the battle cry of a guardian preparing to defend his family. The entire ship felt it, a vibration that resonated through the hull and into the bones of everyone aboard. On the bridge, the crew fell silent. In the recreation deck, children woke from their sleep and somehow knew that they were safe, that something powerful was watching over them. And in her ready room, Captain Chen stood up and wiped her tears. "Torres," she spoke into the comm system, "prepare Drop Pod 1 and plot a trajectory to the cartel flagship." There was a long pause. "Captain, are you planning to board them?" "Not me," Chen replied, and she reached out to place her hand on Sergeant Fluffkins's armored head. "Him." Vexathari stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot be serious," he said. One Vrixal against an entire warship crew? Captain Chen smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Ambassador, your people designed this creature to be the most perfect killing machine in the galaxy, but you made one mistake. What mistake? You never gave him anything worth fighting for. She scratched behind Fluffkin's ear one last time. We did. The Vrixal purred once, softly, and then turned toward the door. It was time to go to work. The drop pod screamed through the void like a burning meteor, carrying its single passenger toward the massive flagship of the Bloodfang cartel. Inside the pod, Sergeant Fluffkins was perfectly calm, his 6 eyes closed in something that might have been meditation, his breathing slow and steady. On the bridge of the Evergreen, the crew watched in tense silence as the pod approached its target. Cartel ships are tracking the pod, Lieutenant Torres reported. They're trying to lock weapons. Evasive pattern Delta, Captain Chen ordered. Keep them distracted. The Evergreen lurched forward, drawing fire from several nearby destroyers while the drop pod continued its trajectory toward the flagship. Vexithari stood at the back of the bridge, his hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and something else he could not quite identify. Anticipation, perhaps even hope. Impact in 30 seconds, Torres announced. On the cartel flagship, alarms were blaring as crew members scrambled to respond to the incoming projectile. The ship's shields were designed to deflect missiles and plasma fire, but a drop pod was something different. It was too small for the main batteries to track effectively, too fast for point defense systems to intercept. And by the time anyone realized what was happening, it had already punched through the outer hull. The pod crashed into a cargo bay with a tremendous impact that sent crates flying in all directions. For a moment, everything was still. Then the pod doors exploded outward, and Sergeant Fluffkins emerged into the chaos. The first pirate to see him was a Thexian guard who had been stationed near the cargo entrance. He had exactly enough time to raise his weapon and open his mouth to scream before 6 legs carried the Vrixal across the distance between them. One strike was all it took. The creature did not pause to examine its work, but continued forward through the corridors of the flagship with fluid grace. Security footage recovered later would show what happened next, in terrible detail. 47 pirates fell in 11 minutes, but what made military analysts across the galaxy study this footage for years to come was not the speed or the efficiency of the kills. It was the precision. Sergeant Fluffkins moved through the ship like liquid shadow, his scales shifting colors to match his surroundings, his claws making no sound on the metal floors. When he encountered armed combatants, he struck without hesitation, ending threats before they could endanger anyone else. But when he encountered unarmed personnel, something different happened. A young cook who had been pressed into service against her will found herself face to face with the creature in a narrow corridor. She dropped her tray of food and raised her hands in surrender, too terrified to scream. The Vrixal looked at her with those 6 glowing eyes, and for a moment she was certain she was going to die. Then he simply walked past her and continued on his way. She was found hours later, still sitting in that corridor, completely unharmed and unable to stop crying with relief. Throughout the ship, the pattern repeated itself. Those who fought were eliminated without mercy. Those who surrendered were ignored. Those who tried to flee were allowed to go. The creature was not killing indiscriminately like a wild animal. He was making choices, evaluating threats, showing a kind of terrible justice that no one had ever expected from a Vrixal word, spread quickly through the flagship's crew, passed through panicked whispers and terrified glances. There was a monster aboard, something impossible, something that seemed to know the difference between the guilty and the innocent, and it was hunting for someone specific. Gralvok learned of the creature's presence when his personal guard burst into his quarters with weapons drawn and fear in their eyes. "What is happening out there?" The Thexian warlord demanded. "Something is on the ship. Something we cannot stop, and it's coming this way." Gralvok was not a coward. Whatever else could be said about him, he had clawed his way to power through violence and intimidation, and he had never run from a fight in his entire life. He grabbed his personal weapon, a massive plasma rifle that had killed dozens of enemies, and stood his ground. "Let it come!" he snarled. "I will destroy whatever it is!" The doors to his quarters exploded inward with enough force to embed fragments in the opposite wall. Sergeant Fluffkins stepped through the smoke and debris, his scales the color of dried blood, his eyes burning with cold fire. Gralvok opened fire immediately, plasma bolts hammering into the creature's chest and head and legs. The scales absorbed the impacts without any visible damage. The Vrixal did not even slow down. Gralvok kept firing until his weapon overheated and died in his hands, and still the creature advanced. "What are you?" he screamed. Sergeant Fluffkins stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Gralvok could feel the heat radiating from those impossible scales. The creature's telepathic abilities, which had been dormant for months while he played with children and accepted belly rubs, now activated for the first time since arriving on the Evergreen. He reached into Gralvok's mind and showed him something. He showed him the memorial wall on the Evergreen, where photographs of 300 refugees were displayed. He showed him the children's faces, frozen forever in images taken before their lives were cut short. He showed him Captain Chen kneeling before that wall, explaining to a confused bioweapon why some people deserved justice and others deserved mercy. And he showed him the choice that Chen had given him, the freedom to decide for himself what kind of creature he wanted to be. Gralvok understood then what was about to happen to him. He tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The creature that the humans called Sergeant Fluffkins, who wore pink sweaters and played fetch and purred when children braided his mane, showed the Thexian warlord exactly what the Kethoran Dominion had designed him to be. It took considerably longer than 11 minutes when it was over. Sergeant Fluffkins broadcast a single message to every ship in the cartel fleet. It was not words because the Vrixal could not speak. It was something more primal, more terrifying, a telepathic pulse that carried with it the image of what remained of Gralvok, and a simple, unmistakable meaning: leave now or join him. The Bloodfang cartel fleet scattered into hyperspace so fast that some ships left without their full crews. The blockade was broken. The colony was saved. 3 hours later, the airlock of the Evergreen cycled open, and Sergeant Fluffkins walked back onto the ship. His scales were stained with blue Thexian blood, and his eyes still held echoes of the cold fury that had driven him through the enemy flagship. The crew members who had gathered to meet him hesitated, uncertain how to react to this reminder of what their gentle companion was truly capable of. Then a small voice cut through the silence. "Fluffkins!" A little girl, no more than 6 years old, broke free from her mother's arms and ran toward the creature before anyone could stop her. She threw her arms around one of his massive legs and squeezed tight. "You saved us," she said happily. "You saved everyone, good boy Fluffkins, best boy." The Vrixal looked down at her with those 6 eyes, and slowly, very slowly, the darkness faded. His scales shifted from blood red to soft pink. The fire in his gaze cooled to warmth. He lowered his enormous head and gently licked the little girl's hair, and the rumbling purr that filled the corridor was the sweetest sound that anyone aboard had ever heard. Vexithari watched from the edge of the crowd, and for the first time in his very long life he felt tears forming in his eyes. The humans had not just given this creature something to fight for. They had given him something to come home to. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Kellar 7, and Ambassador Vexithari stood once again before the Supreme War Council of the Kethoran Dominion. The chamber was vast and cold, filled with the most powerful military minds in 12 spiral arms, and they had summoned him to deliver his final report on the human Vrixal program. He had spent months preparing for this moment, organizing his observations into data files and tactical analyses and psychological profiles. But standing here now, looking at the stern faces of admirals and generals who had built their careers on the art of war. Vexathari wondered if any of his carefully prepared words could truly convey what he had witnessed. Ambassador Vexathari, the Supreme Admiral's voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. You were assigned to observe how the humans utilized our gift, and we have read your preliminary reports with great interest, but now we require your final assessment and recommendations. Vexathari took a deep breath and activated the holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the council chamber, showing scenes from human ships and colonies across the galaxy. The Vrixal program has exceeded all projections, he began. In the year since we presented the first specimen to humanity, they have requested and received 47 additional creatures. Murmurs of approval rippled through the council. The weapons are being deployed across human space, a general noted with satisfaction. This is excellent news, and it proves that the humans recognize the value of our gift. That is one interpretation, Vexathari said carefully. However, I must clarify exactly how these creatures are being deployed. He changed the display to show a hospital ship orbiting a recently colonized world. This is the medical vessel Healing Hand, which operates in frontier space, providing emergency care to remote colonies, and there are 3 Vrixal aboard. Medical ships have no need for weapons, the Supreme Admiral observed with confusion. They are not functioning as weapons, Admiral. They are functioning as therapy animals. The chamber fell silent. The Vrixal spend their days visiting patients, particularly children who are recovering from traumatic injuries, and the telepathic bond they form helps reduce anxiety and promotes healing. Vexathari changed the display again. This is Search and Rescue Station Delta 7, which responds to emergency situations across an entire sector, and the 2 Vrixal assigned there have participated in 112 rescue operations this year. He showed footage of a Vrixal carefully extracting survivors from a collapsed building, its molecular-edged claws being used to slice through debris with surgical precision. They are not killing anything, he continued. They are saving lives. Another image appeared. This is the colony ship Wanderer, which carries families to new settlements on the frontier, and the Vrixal aboard provides security, yes, but also entertainment for children, companionship for the elderly, and comfort for anyone experiencing the stress of interstellar travel. The council members were staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Ambassador, the Supreme Admiral said slowly, are you telling us that the humans have converted our greatest biological weapons into pets? No, Admiral, what I am telling you is far worse. Vexathari changed the display one final time, showing the Battle of Kalar 7 in tactical overview. When the humans face genuine threats, when their people are in danger and violence becomes necessary, the Vrixal respond with devastating effectiveness, but not because they are programmed to kill. He paused, making sure he had the attention of every being in the chamber. They fight because they are protecting their family. Footage played of Sergeant Fluffkins moving through the cartel flagship, precise and lethal and unstoppable. This creature eliminated 47 hostiles in 11 minutes while simultaneously choosing to spare non-combatants, and that level of tactical discrimination is beyond anything our programming ever achieved. More footage showed the aftermath, the little girl hugging Fluffkins, the creature purring as it was welcomed home. We designed the Vrixal to be weapons of terror, but the humans have transformed them into something more dangerous, weapons of love. The Supreme Admiral's mandibles clicked with agitation. This is concerning because their bonding ability seems to be rewriting our programming. That is precisely my point, Admiral, and it leads me to my primary recommendation. Vexathari straightened to his full height. The Cathoran Dominion should never go to war with humanity. The chamber erupted in outraged protests, but the Supreme Admiral raised a claw for silence. Explain yourself, Ambassador. I have studied human history extensively over the past year, and I have discovered a pattern that terrifies me, Vexithari said. Thousands of years ago, humans shared their world with wolves, pack predators that hunted them and killed their children. He displayed images from human historical archives. Instead of exterminating the wolves, humans chose to befriend them, and over generations they transformed these killers into loyal companions who would die to protect human families. More images appeared. They did the same with horses, massive, powerful animals that could crush a human with a single kick, and they turned them into partners who carried humans across continents. They did it with big cats, with birds of prey, with venomous reptiles, and with every dangerous creature they encountered. Vexithari looked directly at the Supreme Admiral. The humans have a gift that no other species possesses. They see something deadly and their first instinct is not to destroy it, but to love it. He thought of Captain Chen kneeling before Sergeant Fluffkins, calling him buddy, asking for his help instead of commanding it. And the truly terrifying thing is that it works, because every creature they adopt becomes fanatically loyal to them, willing to fight and die for the family that welcomed them. The council was silent now, listening. We gave them a weapon, and they gave us back a miracle, Vexithari continued. A creature that was bred for genocide now protects children and saves lives and only unleashes its full potential when its loved ones are threatened. He deactivated the display. If we go to war with humanity, we will not be facing their ships or their soldiers because we will be facing every single creature they have ever loved, every predator they have tamed, every monster they have transformed into a guardian. Vexithari's voice dropped to almost a whisper. We will not see them coming until we are wearing sweaters and answering to names like Snookums, and by then it will be too late. The Supreme Admiral was quiet for a long moment. What would you have us do, Ambassador? Make peace with them, Vexithari said simply. Become their friends before they decide to make us their friends. Because I have seen what happens to their enemies, but I have also seen what happens to those they love. He thought of Sergeant Fluffkins, curled protectively around sleeping children, purring with contentment. Their enemies are destroyed, but their friends are transformed, and I believe transformation is the better option. The council deliberated for hours, but in the end they voted unanimously to accept his recommendation. Peace was declared, trade agreements were signed, cultural exchanges began. And somewhere in human space, aboard a ship called the Evergreen, a creature who had been designed for destruction was teaching a group of children how to play a human game called hide and seek. His scales were pink and covered with finger-painted flowers. His sweater said, "Galaxy's best boy." And when the children found him hiding behind a cargo container and tackled him with squealing delight, Sergeant Fluffkins purred so loudly that the vibrations could be felt 3 decks away. The Kethoran Dominion had created a weapon, the humans had created a family. And as Vexithari watched the video feed from his new position as permanent ambassador to humanity, he found himself smiling. Galaxy's best boy indeed, he murmured, and wondered if perhaps there might be a Vrixal available for the Kethoran embassy. After all, he had heard that they made excellent companions, and honestly, he thought a pink sweater might look rather nice on him, too.